In this video, we are tracking Tropical Storm Nicole, expected to be a hurricane, and a major pattern change is setting up heading into next week. So let's take a look at the overall setup this morning. You can see this actually dominant ridge that's been locked over the northeast. That is Tropical Storm Nicole underneath it. And that is a kind of a dangerous setup, guys. This is kind of in a unique position where you're so warm this late in the season in November that we're going to look to be probably a rapidly developing tropical system heading into Florida, making landfall going into Thursday. At the same time, we have a really dominant ridge really building over Alaska, while we have a trough setting up underneath, bringing in some much cooler conditions and more healthier rains back into California. But that's going to set the stage for some severe weather, and if not a blizzard in parts of the Dakotas. So let's take a look at the latest setup for a Tropical Storm Nicole. It is what they call a subtropical type features. It's just really, it's going to be a very large system. It does have 50 miles per hour. The thing about it is it has actually slowed down a little bit. Now it's down to 8 miles an hour. So that's an indication where it could spend a little bit more time over water and actually get it a little bit stronger. So the latest update from the Hurricane Center is it does have it moving west northwest, but I feel like whenever it turns that westward direction, that's when it's going to start to develop and really start to intensify. And their update is a 75 mile per hour hurricane in about 48 hours, but I'm expecting maybe a little bit higher than that based on the ridge that's going to be happening and just the low shear environment and the extra time that's going to have over the open water. So here's the storm surge right now from this system as this is going to be moving into Florida into the overnight hours. I feel like this won't be making landfall until sometime late Wednesday night, early Thursday morning. But yeah, we could be looking at a pretty bona fide storm surge along 2 to 4 feet, if not 3 to 5 feet along this corridor here. So beach erosion is going to be a concern with just a huge, large wind field from this system. But like I mentioned, it does enter a low shear environment. So you have a really dominant ridge, have that pressure gradient from the north, setting up the low shear underneath. This is like textbook setup for rapid intensification. Unfortunately, tapping into some of those still 82, 84 degree waters out here. So yes, I am expecting this to become a hurricane, if not even a potential strong category 1 hurricane as it makes landfall early Thursday morning. So here's the latest update from the hurricane models. And I feel like this is the most accurate because this is actually the most bullish, because I am fairly bullish on this system now, especially with the slower development. But this one actually has it down to a 972 millibar low pressure, would take it up to about an 85, 90 mile per hour hurricane. So if you live along into Port St. Lucia, into Orlando, I think you need to be prepared for a hurricane landfall into the overnight hours on Wednesday going into Thursday. And it's going to be an overnight event. So here's the latest track. So here's the cone of uncertainty right now. So the West Palm Beach is still within that cone going into Port St. Lucia. Right now it's expected to make landfall somewhere into portions of Palm Bay, go right over Orlando into the overnight hours. And then it could reemerge out in the open waters of the Gulf of Mexico. But even if it does, it won't last long at all, because we have a pretty strong cold front that's going to be making its way. And I feel like with the slower speed, it's probably not going to reemerge out into the open waters now and stay over land. But I'm not expecting any more re-strengthening as this as it makes landfall. But there's going to be a cold side of the storm too. So we got a cold sector with that significant trough. Plenty of healthy snows coming for the Sierra Nevadas. We're talking 1 to 5 feet of snow. And then out ahead of it, we've got really healthier snows moving back in the picture in Montana. But up here in the Dakotas and up here in more northern portions of Minnesota, this is going to be a very heavy snow event, if not a blizzard, coming up on Thursday morning through Friday morning with this particular setup. So we've got a pretty unique situation with a hurricane making landfall. And then we've got a blizzard happening in the Dakotas, and we've got a severe threat in the northern plains here that we're going to be talking about. So as we move through your Tuesday timeframe today, there's the significant rains that's going to be pulling in into the California coast all the way and down to San Diego. They're going to be experiencing some very beneficial, they're under flood watches down here in Southern California. There's the heavier snow for the Sierra Nevadas, but they'll swing through Nevada, portions of Utah here, going through Idaho and especially into Montana. And there's Nicole really getting its act together, and as it's going to be making its westbound turn sometime this afternoon. But there's the overall jet stream that's really digging down with that 1034 Arctic high pressure, dragging down that colder air. Got the warm sector out ahead of it. You've been plenty of warm this week, and with that low pressure underneath, that's going to set the stage for that rapid development, I feel, as it heads to the coastline. So as we move through your Wednesday time frame, there's that trough getting a little bit closer. So now the heavier snows will move especially over Utah by then, going into Wyoming. That'll start to filter in into Montana and then start to swing in into portions of the Dakotas, waiting for that trough that's going to be moving in, and that jet stream that's going to set the stage for some severe storms as we head into your Thursday time frame. So there is the setup from the Storm Prediction Center. It does highlight that slight risk for severe weather within the warm sector, and this is probably going to be an earlier type of event. But if you live in portions of Kansas, going into northwestern Missouri here, all of Iowa here, and going into Wisconsin, and I feel like this actually gets expanded even further north, you need to be on high alert for some severe storms of damaging winds, some isolated hail, and it does appear that we could be looking at some isolated tornado threats. So we got all three modes of severe storms heading into the day on Thursday before that upper level low will be swinging across. And there's the warm sector. This is the temperatures by around 10 o'clock in the morning on Thursday. You got the warm sector, you got elevated dew points, you got the low level jet tapping into it. This is going to be your severe threat underneath it. To the northwest of there, you got plenty of the cold air falling. There's heavier snows falling into the teens and a good chunk of the Dakotas. So this is a pretty significant cold front, probably some of the strongest colder air of the season. And there's plenty of cold air back behind what's to come. So here is the setup by Thursday with the heavier snow swath going over the Dakotas. We could be looking at upwards to say 2 feet potentially in portions of Bismarck. And then the heavier snows will filter into northern portions of Minnesota here. That's why they've got the winter storm watches in place right now. But just to the southeast of there, underneath that low pressure, we got to be concerned for that severe threat earlier on before this cold air taps into the system. There's Nicole over Florida dumping that heavier rain as it makes landfall, and then that maybe might reemerge in the Gulf, but I don't really think it does. But then either way, it's going to be rapidly feeling the effects of that cold front swinging down to the southeast, picking it up and swinging it over to Georgia, South Carolina, going into portions of North Carolina, and that will just extend and push upward, extending into the portions of Virginia, going into West Virginia. I do feel portions of, say, Kentucky gets into the action a little bit. Lighter amounts into Ohio, especially on the southeastern side, going into Pennsylvania, upstate New York, and then eventually this will be all along the coast while the rest of the country starts to dry out behind that cold front. So as we move into your Saturday time frame, as that colder air will continue to plunge, you can see the 1028 Arctic high pressure with those blue lines here. That's an indication where the cold front will be by the time we go into Saturday morning, right there elongated into portions of Texas. But a new disturbance will develop in portions of South Texas, bringing some heavier rains to portions of the Rio Grande Valley, portions of Corpus Christi into the Houston area. But then there's the remnants of Nicole be spreading itself over New Jersey, New York by then, into Massachusetts, Rhode Island, back into Connecticut, spreading all the way into Vermont. a month. So the whole entire East Coast actually gets impacted from this event. So we're talking some very large waves, a lot of beach erosions with just a large wind field. And then we got the heavier winds coming ashore as we go making landfall Wednesday night into Thursday. But there's some of your rain amounts for the rest of the week. There's the graph on the left-hand corner of the screen, and all the areas where it is going to be making landfall, probably up to 4 to 5 inches of rain back into portions of Orlando. But all the areas in orange here, that's at least 2-inch amounts, a good healthy swath, literally all the way up the coast. Even New York is about 2.5 inches from this system, extending all the way northward. So there's going to be a little bit higher amounts right on the extreme coastline, a little bit lesser amounts as you move inland, say in the DC, but even in the green shaded areas, that's upward to possibly an inch, inch and a half of rainfall. And then the lighter areas are up to about a 1/2 inch to possibly an inch. And of course it goes down from there. But the whole entire southeastern seaboard along the eastern coast has some sort of impacts or feels the effects of what's to come with Nicole. So here's the bigger picture for the rest of the country. You know, with that trough coming in off the West Coast, you got the heavier rains moving into California, so this is definitely a welcome sign. But notice the difference up here. You got to get a lull in the activity in the Pacific Northwest. You've been really active since the 20th of the month, and this is the 8th, so it was a good 3 weeks of heavier rains. I think the tap shut off for our major pattern change that we're going to actually highlight and what's to come. This is the heavier snow swath, but then there's the heavier rains, especially just kind of along the coast. With that disturbance that's moving in, but all those heavier rains from Nicole, and there's your overall snow amounts, is really impressive. Here's the graph on the bottom right hand corner of the screen with that 1 to 5 feet of snow in the Sierra Nevadas, spreading over Nevada into Utah with some decent healthy snows into the Rocky Mountains. But Montana and North Dakota and northern portions of Minnesota just gets crushed with this system over the next week, with very impressive snowfall totals. 1 to 2 feet is definitely not out of the question as it pulls northward into Canada. But the big change is what's happening is in the SOI index, which is your Southern Oscillation Index. We've been in this La Nina since basically 2020, an extremely long time. But man, we've seen a rapid deceleration, a drop in the SOI index. This is the first signs that La Nina might be actually weakening and starting to lose its grip. And what that will do is that'll start to activate the southern jet stream, the subtropical jet stream. And this is typically about an 8 to 10 day lagging indicator. So you can actually see this is pretty impressive drop on the 90-day moving average and the 30-day moving average, which is actually lower than the 90-day moving average. That's how far it's dropped. And that negative 31 that we got yesterday, that's the most significant drop that we've seen since the La Nina started. So we're seeing a leading indicator of a major flip that, hey, the La Nina might be actually losing its grip. So what does that mean? So let's take a look at this setup. So the polar jet, typically in a La Nina, you get a little bit more active, and you've seen that. You've seen the impressive atmospheric river along this area, but the polar jet tends to become a little bit less active during this elevated times when the subtropical jet is more active. So as what that typically means is, as the cold air will continue to plunge south, now that the subtropical jet is a little bit more active, that'll increase the rain amounts further south, but it'll also pull the snow line further south as well, heading into next week. So things actually do kind of get interesting. So we'll have that negative EPO really setting up by the 14th of the month. Really dominant feature, well above average temperatures in Alaska. Look at the southern jet stream really starting to get active underneath. So as the cold air drops, that'll bring that snow line down for a good chunk of next week, and really things definitely start to get interesting. But what's even more interesting is this is impressive outlook from the Climate Prediction Center yesterday, and they highlighted this. This is those well above average temperatures in Alaska, well below average in the lower 48. In fact, the entire lower 48 is below average. This is unique because it's only This will be the 5th time since January of 2015 that we've actually seen something like this with such extreme anomalies like this. But look at that, with the southern jet, with the polar jet less active, you start to dry out over the polar jet, you become more active on the southern jet. That places the rain and the precipitation further south as the cold air moves further south as well. So by the time we get into Wednesday, with that lagging indicator on the SOI index, and typically it's about an 8 to 10 day lagging indicator since the negative deviations, by the 16th of the month, that'll put it right in line with that 8 to 10 day indicator. So this is a pretty strong indication that this snow line could be this far south, heading into portions of Kansas, getting some snow into the Texas panhandle and portions of Oklahoma by then, as we have just a chilly rain spreading over a good chunk of Texas. But as we go into that Thursday timeframe of next week, I think that snow line can pull a little bit further south, deeper into the Texas panhandle, a little bit deeper into Oklahoma as well. And then of course you'll have those rains, complements of the southern jet, a little bit more active, spreading into the southeast, while the polar jet becomes a little bit less active during next week. So things definitely start to get interesting. But overall for next week, man, we've got plenty of cold air. This is just locked and loaded, textbook setup with a negative EPO, and then pulls in all the cold air underneath, going into the central and eastern 2/3 of the US. And there's the temperature anomalies heading into next week, with all these areas in the green of a good 10 to 15 degrees below average. And that is the average high and the low temperature average over those 5 days. So that's some pretty cold stuff. Not only does it get cold at night, but it remains cold during the day. So we'll have to watch this setup going into next week and see how far south that snow line is able to get. And if it spreads into portions, heading into Oklahoma or Arkansas, even portions of Texas, going into next week. So we'll be watching that closely. So, hey, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video. Definitely leave your comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel to catch the latest update while I protect you before and after the storm.